ability, which makes reading, holding a book, or turning a page difficult or impossible. The content is copyrighted by the respective publishers. For more information, please visit us on the web at nfradioreading.org.
Hello, this is Jean, and for the next hour, I'll be reading from the Sunday, March 22nd, 2026 issue of the Viewpoints section of the Buffalo News on Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. With war abroad and injustice at home, Jackson's ideas resonate, by Rishi Awaratramani. As the U.S. wades even deeper into the conflict with Iran, some Democratic and progressive political figures are trying to figure out how to connect the public's wariness about the war with concerns about affordability and the widespread reaction against President Trump's xenophobic immigration policies. If you're looking for a template to do it well, one can be found in the words and actions of a political figure who recently passed away, the Reverend Jesse Jackson. While attention after his death has rightfully focused on Jackson's long involvement with the civil rights movement, the more telling lesson for this moment is how his presidential campaigns connected a concern for addressing domestic disenfranchisement with resolute stance against U.S. military adventures, a message that built on and echoed the Reverend Martin Luther King Jr.'s landmark 1967 speech against the Vietnam War, economic exploitation, and racial injustice. Jackson's candidacies in 1984 and 1988 emerged when the social compacts forged by the labor, civil rights, and women's movements of the 20th century were being systematically undone. Deindustrialization was hollowing out working-class communities. Reaganomics was consolidating power around tax cuts for the wealthy, deregulation, and attacks on unions. A new corporate consensus was hardening, one that increasingly shaped both major parties, prioritizing financial elites while disciplining labor and shrinking the public sphere. Sound familiar? Jackson refused to accept that such a right-wing and corporate realignment was inevitable. His Rainbow Coalition was far more ambitious than a candidate-centered campaign. It was an attempt to build an organized, multiracial, cross-class political front capable of contesting the direction of the country itself. The coalition brought together constituencies that conventional political wisdom said could not unite: black voters in the South, industrial workers in the Midwest, family farmers in crisis, Latino and Native organizers, Arab American activists, peace advocates, labor insurgents, and progressive whites. Jackson's platform did not treat these groups as symbolic additions. It linked their material concerns. Farmers facing foreclosure were not an afterthought. The farm crisis was at the forefront. Deindustrialized workers were not rhetorical props. Trade, jobs, and industrial policy were central. Civil rights were braided together with economic justice. And crucially, Jackson insisted, as King had, that economic populism could not be separated from anti-militarism. At the height of the Cold War, amid Reagan's military buildup and interventionist doctrine, Jackson argued that bloated Pentagon budgets were not abstract line items. They were resources diverted away from schools, healthcare, and housing and jobs. He connected the violence of the abandonment at home to the violence of intervention abroad, and his campaign called for redirecting military spending toward human needs and for diplomacy over escalation. When Jackson thundered that we should choose the human race over the nuclear race, this was not a simple turn of phrase. It was integral to the coalition's moral and economic logic. A government that prioritizes war over welfare, weapons over workers, cannot sustain democratic life. That clarity feels especially salient today as the U.S. continues to pursue military interventions and proxy conflicts whose legality and human cost are deeply contested. Once again, defense budgets swell. Once again, dissent against war is treated as disloyalty. Jackson rejected that false choices decades ago. He understood that militarism abroad reinforces inequality and immorality at home. Jackson's 1988 campaign captured millions of votes, won primaries and caucuses across the country, and forced issues into the Democratic Party that party elites preferred to sideline. He demonstrated that a progressive program grounded in the lived experiences of ordinary people, rural collapse, urban disinvestment, plant closures, racial injustice, and war could assemble a national constituency. Unfortunately, after Jackson's last campaign, his experiment in independent organizational life was folded too tightly into the mainstream Democratic Party. While that seemed a strategy to achieve a broader front, it meant that the progressive anchor was unmoored, and the effort dissolved before it could truly mature. But the lessons of that era may be more relevant than ever. Today we again confront an ever-ascendant rightward turn buttressed by concentrated corporate power and normalized militarism. As in Jackson's day, some leaders seek to deflect our attention, blaming economic challenges on the proximate other in his era. Black women taking welfare, in our era, immigrants taking jobs, rather than those with power. Jackson understood that defeating reactionary politics required isolating it, not only morally, but structurally, by assembling a coalition larger than the right's base and rooted in shared material demands. He understood that hope had to be organized, and that peace had to be part of prosperity. His campaigns showed that racial injustice, labor rights, rural survival, gender equality, and anti-war politics were not competing claims, but interlocking ones. Protest has surged in the U.S., particularly after the excesses in Minnesota, but protest alone does not prevent consolidation. Nor do narrow electoral bargains that leave the underlying corporate and military consensus intact. At a time when both parties remain deeply entangled with corporate and defense interests, remembering the promise of the rainbow is not nostalgia. It is instruction. New York's Nuclear Power Momentum is a Good Thing, by Carol Browner and Jose Gaona. We don't agree on everything. Carol remembers when nuclear was a dirty word in environmental circles. Jose has grown up in a world where climate change is a real and present threat. It is the defining challenge of his generation. But when we look at New York charting a bold new course on clean energy, we're speaking with one voice. This is what progress looks like. New York isn't tiptoeing into clean nuclear power. It's sprinting. The momentum for progress is unmistakable. Governor Kathy Hochul recently directed plans to add 4 gigawatts of additional nuclear power capacity, enough to power millions of homes without adding any carbon pollution to the environment. 8 communities across the state are already raising their hands to host the new reactors. The state just extended its zero emissions credit program, providing affirmation to existing nuclear plants that have quietly been doing the work of powering New York for decades without producing carbon pollution. The governor also mandated a statewide review of advanced nuclear technologies, including small modular reactors, to bolster state plans for a comprehensive clean energy system. This isn't just esoteric policy. It's a fundamental shift in how New York thinks about our energy future. And it's not a moment too soon. For too long, we've been told we must choose between reliable, affordable power or a clean, healthy environment. Nuclear energy shatters that false choice. Nuclear power is constant and reliable. It helps keep the lights on during brutal winter storms and sweltering summer heat. Nuclear power plants don't emit carbon pollution, and they create good-paying jobs that last, not just during construction, but for the 60-plus years in which these facilities operate. Americans back nuclear power because it's a low-carbon source of energy. Nearly 6 in 10 people support expanding nuclear power, a 17% jump since 2020, backed by both Republicans and Democrats. People see their electricity bills going up. They feel climate disasters getting worse. They're looking for affordable solutions that transcend politics and put consumers first. What's happening in New York matters beyond New York. By aligning its climate goals with practical, available, expandable, and affordable clean energy sources, such as nuclear power and renewables, it sends a strong signal that power and prosperity can be in balance. New York is showing what can be achieved when strong policy is supported by policymakers and the community. The beauty of this moment is how it brings people together who rarely occupy the same space. Union workers who build these plants, tech leaders developing advanced reactor designs, environmental champions fighting against pollution, young people who refuse to accept that their future has to be worse than their parents'. Governors and mayors who need solutions to keep the lights on while meeting climate targets. That's why we have hope. When Carroll started in environmental policy, nuclear power was considered the enemy. When Jose began advocating for climate solutions, the future seemed bleak. Today, we both recognize that we need energy solutions that work, and nuclear energy works. No state has all the answers, but New York is showing what's possible when leaders focus on practical solutions instead of political soundbites. New York is building a sustainable energy future. It's a blueprint for other states, especially those with nuclear power capacity, to build their own reliable and clean energy sources. The climate clock is ticking. We can't wait any longer. New York isn't waiting, it's leading. Another voice, state government. Hochul's reforms confront reality of fraud by Ryan Law. New York drivers pay some of the highest auto insurance premiums in America. The average policy now runs about $4,000 a year, roughly $1,500 above the national average. The reason isn't just inflation or repair costs. It's a growing share of the bill comes from fraud. There is finally a policy response. Governor Kathy Hochul has proposed a series of reforms aimed at cracking down on staged crashes, fraudulent medical claims, and lawsuits that inflate insurance payouts. The numbers illustrate how widespread the problem has become. In 2025, insurance carriers reported more than 40,000 incidents of suspected motor vehicle insurance fraud in New York, representing a more than 80% increase since 2020. Industry estimates suggest that these scams add roughly $300 a year to the average driver's insurance bill. Court filings and investigative reporting describe a system built around the claims that follow accidents. Recruiters, known as runners, solicit accident victims and steer them to specific lawyers and medical clinics, sometimes coaching participants to exaggerate injuries. Clinics may then order treatments that can dramatically increase the value of an insurance claim and a related lawsuit. In one case, conspirators recruited hundreds of patients to stage or falsely claim trip and fall accidents, generating fraudulent lawsuits that attempted to extract more than $31 million from insurers and businesses. Once the operations establish themselves, they expand quickly. Recruiters find new participants. Clinics perform more procedures. Lawsuits multiply. Analysts estimate that the state's legal system imposes more than $7,000 per year in costs on the average household, while excessive litigation pushes consumer prices, including insurance, higher across the economy. Hochul's reforms confront the reality by tightening liability rules, cracking down on staged accidents, and strengthening enforcement tools. A legal system designed to compensate legitimate victims shouldn't function as a business model for organized fraud. For millions of New Yorkers who depend on their cars every day, bringing that system back into balance is the difference between an insurance bill that keeps climbing and one that finally begins to come down. In negotiations, the numbers are close, but New York's budget debate is mainly about policy. A huge New York State budget with a price tag that will settle down somewhere between Governor Kathy Hochul's executive proposal of $260 billion, the Assembly's $266 billion, and the Senate's $270 billion is once again, for the most part, focused on affordability and help for working families. But there are policies intertwined among the numbers that have different priorities. Somewhere around April 1st, New York residents will find out what survived and what was beaten back. But here's a snapshot of what we know. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the Viewpoints section on the Buffalo News on Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Tax hike proposals persist. With New York City Mayor Zohan Mamdani in the mix, taxing the rich becomes a stronger clarion call. But, as usual, Hochul is adamantly opposing any hikes. While the Assembly and the Senate proposals to increase the taxes of individuals making over $5 million a year by 0.2% or 0.5% respectively don't sound terribly out of line, the optics on this will always be bad. It's been suggested that a compromise, hiking rates for the wealthy corporations, might make it through. Bottom line, the revenue to make up for federal slashing of Medicaid, food assistance, affordable health insurance, green energy incentives, and other programs important to New Yorkers has to come from somewhere. Childcare is a shared priority. The three proposals agree in calling for more funding for pre-kindergarten and boosting the state's child care voucher program, which helps families with children aged between 6 weeks and 13 years. But the Senate is the only one calling for funding to raise the pay of child care workers. It's a crucial point. Without the workers, there is no care, and this workforce is notoriously underpaid. Battle over Climate Act is full of distortions. Where to begin with New York's beleaguered Community Leadership and Climate Protection Act? Thankfully, both the Senate and Assembly leadership seem ready to keep the legislation intact, but Hochul is mostly correct when she notes, as she did on Wednesday, the high utility costs we're experiencing now are not because of this CLCPA, because it's not in effect yet. The law is technically in effect, but the measures that would help the state actually meet its climate goals have not been enacted. A much disputed memo from the New York State Energy Research and Development Authority states that implementing Cap and Invest, basically a polluter's pay program, would cost households thousands. But Rachel Spector, an attorney with Earth Justice, part of a group that recently won a court case over implementing the CLCPA, says that New York's a draconian version of the Cap and Invest, and that her group would be willing to work with the state on a settlement that would actually save households money. Hochul says she wants to extend the timeline to meet climate goals and may want to make other changes. What all parties should keep in mind is that the high energy costs have everything to do with the price of fossil fuels. Seems like a good reason to keep moving away from them at a brisk pace. All three proposals want to provide a utility bill relief, with the Assembly going so far as to propose a 2-year moratorium on electric and gas rate hikes and rebates for ratepayers. Some version of what's been proposed is urgently needed. New York residents are being hit hard on this front. Controversial proposals. While the three budgets have unanimity on a move to place a 75% tax on smoke-free nicotine pouches, which could raise much-needed funds for health care, there's plenty of opposition from business groups who say it would hurt revenue and others who say it would fuel the illicit market. And there's minimal buy-in from the legislature on Hochul's push to lower car insurance premiums by limiting liability and adding protections against fraud. These budgets contain much more fodder for debate within their thousands of pages, but it's a good bet nobody in Buffalo City Hall mayoral office will be complaining about getting up to $56.8 million in municipal aid. Stay tuned for updates as the budget negotiations proceed. My View by Toby Bean. Pushing to excel is its own reward. A warm sun shone through a clear, brilliant blue sky. We had just finished a short traverse around a massive rock slide at the base of Croda Rossa, a distinctively pinkish mountain in the Dolomites in the Italian Alps. Our guide brought our group together, and both his expression and voice took an uncharacteristically serious tone. "This section of the trail is narrow," he told us. "There are cables. Use them," he directed. We had arrived at our first Via Ferrata, Italian for Iron Way. These sections of trail are steep and narrow with significant exposure and drop-offs. Cables are permanently affixed to the rock, offering safety for the hikers. I knew this was a possibility during our hiking trip, but it still sent a bolt of fear through me. As we reached the first cable, my heart raced and sweat beaded on my forehead. I pressed the record button on my GoPro and grasped the cable. For the next mile, we navigated a trail scarcely 3 feet wide, notched into a wall of limestone, winding its way hundreds of feet above the valley below. I recorded the whole stretch so I'd be able to see what I missed while I was watching the cable and my feet. The audio was a comical mix of muttering, "Oh God," and "Okay, I can do this." I was terrified. I've always been competitive. A drive from deep within me pushes me to try and be the best, continually testing my own personal boundaries. My competitive drive has manifested in many forms throughout my life. Games, grades, wilderness adventures, running road races, and triathlons. Whether it was an international competition like Ironman Lake Placid or a one-on-one contest with a friend, I was ready to compete and wanted to win. As I clutched the cable on Croda Rosa, my only competition was the mountain and my own psyche. With age and experience, I've seen a major shift within myself. Where once it was all the desire to win, my focus has shifted inward. I know that I am not the best. I never was and probably never will be. That truth does not preclude the ability to improve on my own best, and it provides a liberating freedom to find joy in the successes of every single person around me. Prior to my first Ironman, I remember a discussion thread where a triathlete was criticizing swimmers who couldn't maintain a 2-minute per 100-meter pace. He said they shouldn't be allowed to participate. His elitist attitude angered and simultaneously saddened me. I responded, "I admire and cheer for every single athlete on the course, from the world-class athletes to the final finishers. I only want to see success for everyone on the course, even if you are passing me in the finisher's chute." A palpable sense of calm settled over me as I reached the end of the cables. I took a moment to soak in the raw beauty all around me. After the adrenaline faded from my intense hike, the memory simmered into a new confidence in myself and my ability to overcome what was once felt difficult or impossible. In the end, it is the challenge that is the reward. The prize is what I learned about myself through the journey. As the finish line approaches, or the summit comes into view, an overwhelming joy and pride takes over, and that personal achievement changes you forever. Affordability issues can be addressed by giving farmers a chance, by Anthony Ponk. While my mom didn't coin the phrase, "If you fail to plan, you are planning to fail," she definitely liked expressing it while I was growing up. It was also a mantra of her parents on our family's dairy farm. That's where our future, as that of most farmers, depends on knowing what to do and how to do it. For this reason, farmers and consumers alike are struggling to know what steps to take in an increasingly troubled economy. The Trump administration's plan to investigate industry consolidation in the meatpacking industry would promote competition and potentially drive down prices. And New York Senator Chuck Schumer's Family Grocery and Farmer Relief Act goes deeper, creating and enforcing divestiture plans for corporations and ordering a study of foreign-controlled meat and food processors, such as Chinese-owned firms like Smithfield Foods. While these are positive measures, more is required to give farmers a fighting chance to figure out how to move forward. Some additions to the Farm Bill that are moving through Congress could do just that. One top affordability concern involves beef prices. The price per pound of ground beef has soared from about $1.50 per pound in 2000 to just under $7 per pound now. This leap is the result of decades of bipartisan neglect of our food system. The basics of supply and demand reveal that our country doesn't have the herds we used to. In fact, beef cattle stocks are currently at a 75-year low and trending downward. While high prices at the grocery store might entice would-be farmers to start herds, rising input costs and farmland decimated by drought have made entering the profession nearly impossible. Adding insult to injury, some of our government's recent policies hurt farmers. First, the war in Iran disrupts the flow of oil through the Strait of Hormuz, raising the already high input prices for gas and fertilizer. And then there's beef imports from Argentina and other countries, which have steadily ticked up since 2021. On February 6th of this year, President Trump signed an executive order that quadrupled beef imports from Argentina. While it's possible such actions may offer brief respite to consumers at the grocery store, they do nothing for our long-term farm economy. The National Family Farm Coalition's Farm Bill platform, updated in February, includes proposals that would bring down prices for farmers, improve markets, and ensure consumer knowledge of what they're purchasing. In terms of specific proposals in the platform, the Farmland for Farmers Act, introduced in 2023, would limit corporate purchases of farmland, helping to rein in rising prices that present a critical barrier for newcomers. In advancing the Livestock Owned by Communities to Advance Local Foods Act, would strengthen local markets by allowing for on-farm slaughter of livestock. This proposal incentivizes the growth of local production and consumption. Furthermore, reinstating mandatory country of origin labeling would restore market integrity and fair competition for U.S. producers and allow consumers to make informed purchasing decisions. Incorporating these bills in the Farm Bill would give farmers a chance to build their herds and stop corporations from taking critical resources from them. Farmers know that planning is key to their future, but a government that continually undercuts them makes an already uncertain future even more difficult to navigate. Instead of working against farmers, our policymakers ought to change course and partner with them in making some critical additions to the Farm Bill to give producers a chance to make a decent living. MAGA discourse continues devolving into childish nonsense, by Susan Estridge. Megyn Kelly, the former Fox News host turned podcaster, is in the business of getting attention. This week it worked. She got the attention of the President of the United States in her attack on fellow conservative talker Mark Levin, not to mention the support of fellow bomb thrower Marjorie Taylor Greene. At the center of the attack is the question of the size of Mark Levin's member. Levin is in for the war with Iran. Kelly is against it. But they aren't debating the war like we teach children to do, using their words to make a point rather than calling names. No, the way you get attention is by going on the attack. Poor Megyn Kelly, an emotionally unhinged, lewd, and petulant wreck. She's completely revealed and destroyed herself, Levin wrote in on social media post on Sunday. She's everything people say she is, but much worse. Never an intelligent, thoughtful, or substantive comment. Utterly toxic. Kelly responded to Levin, calling him Micropenis Mark, writing that he thinks he has the monopoly on lewd. He tweets about me obsessively in the crudest, nastiest terms possible, Kelly wrote. Literally more than some stalkers I've had arrested. He doesn't like it when women like me fight back, because of his micropenis. That's when Trump got involved. He took to social media on Sunday to defend Levin and attack Kelly. Mark Levin, a truly great American patriot, is somewhat under siege by other people with far less intellect, capability, and love for our country. Mark is tough and strong and brilliant. When you hear others unfairly attack Mark, remember that they are jealous and angry human beings whose sway is much less than the public understands and will, now that they know where I stand, rapidly diminish. Meghan was not cowed. She piled on. Kelly wrote on Monday that Levin is such a small man he had to go beg the president for a pat on the head in the middle of a war to make himself feel better about, well, you know. Just like all feckless, weakling bullies, Micro can dish it out, but he can't take it. After just one post putting the so-called great one in his place, he ran crying to Daddy, she wrote. Former Republican Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene, once a staunch Trump ally, offered her support to Kelly, writing, I wholeheartedly support Megyn Kelly telling the world that Mark Levin has a micro penis. It's the most deserved insult, and I don't care if it's vulgar. And Trump's gigantic defense of Levin only enraged the base more. People are done. MAGA destroyed by micro penis Mark Levin. These are our opinion leaders? Our public intellectuals? The people getting all the attention in what should be a serious discussion of our goals and our mission in Iran? This is what MAGA has devolved into? In the midst of this, you have the president and his FCC chair complaining about how the mainstream media is covering the war. The mainstream media is a model of restraint compared to the screamers on the right. If the coverage comes out to be mixed at best, and that's because this administration has so completely failed at messaging this war, stating a rationale, defining the engagement, outlining the end game. Theirs is an invitation to skeptical coverage. The way to deal with that skeptical coverage is to answer the underlying questions about mission and duration, not to blame the people who are asking. But MAGA is too busy throwing mud at each other to answer the fundamental questions about this war that still have not been addressed. President Trump has no one to blame but his own friends for the coverage he doesn't like. They deserve it. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the Viewpoints section of the Buffalo News on Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Buffalo Next. Real estate. Zillow says region is still a hotspot for housing, by David Robinson. Don't expect Buffalo Niagara home prices to stop rising anytime soon. A new forecast from real estate firm Zillow predicts that the home values across the Buffalo Niagara region will rise by 3.9% this year. That would be half as much as the 7.6% rise in median sale prices last year, and the smallest increase in the decade, according to data from the Buffalo Niagara Association of Realtors. But a 4% price increase is nothing to sneeze at, especially when the nationwide housing market has been sputtering for the last couple of years, especially in the South and the West. Zillow predicts that home values nationwide will increase by only 0.4% this year. Locally, the number of homes for sale is slowly creeping higher from its post-pandemic low. Mortgage rates, which have dipped to around 6%, are giving buyers more purchasing power and helping to at least offset the impact on affordability caused by the decade of steep price growth. Lower mortgage rates have helped improve buying power by about $30,000 for a median income household over the past year, while the typical mortgage payment is down 7.7% from a year ago, excluding taxes and insurance, Zillow said in the report. Lower mortgage rates could loosen the lock-in effect that has depressed housing inventory levels for years, with homeowners reluctant to give up their 3% to 4% mortgages for a new one at today's higher rates. And if more homes hit the market, it likely will rev up sales, which has been depressed over the last few years because there were so few homes to buy. Industrial Past adds a touch of history to Lofts at Malthouse, by Jonathan D. Epstein. It has been more than a century since the giant gears and belts turned the augers lining the 30-foot-long machine that churned the hot grains in the John Cam Malthouse. Prohibition ended the long run of what was once one of the world's largest malthouse. But the hulking building at 356 Hurdle Avenue remained standing, with much of its aging machinery still intact. I love historic buildings, developer Fred LaFaso of Sienna Realty said. The building was in such bad shape. It was in worse shape than I thought, but I thought it was worthy. Now, decades after it was last used for grain feed production, LaFaso has brought the 7-story structure back to use, but for a very different purpose. Its industrial remnants, including 2 turning machines, manual levers to flip perforated floor panels, and a length of track atop a knee-high brick wall, is now incorporated into a new loft apartment complex. Tenants can pass through the same passageways and metal portals once used by malting workers, or see the graffiti left behind more recently when the building's vast open core was used as an indoor skateboard park. And they share that space with several hundred self-storage units in the building's center, a massive open area underneath the barrel tile roof and wooden doghouse structure that allows in natural light. We did our best to maintain the original character as much as possible, LaFaso said. My father was an antique dealer, and he always told me, you never want to polish something and make it look like it's brand new. You want to keep the original patina. And I carried that throughout much of this process. LaFaso, late last year, completed his $32 million rehab and renovation of the malt house. The project took 2.5 years, longer than expected, because the brownfield cleanup was more extensive than expected and took 4 months longer than planned, LaFaso said. The cost, $3 million. Constructed in 1901, the complex consists of several connected structures, including the 7-story malt building, the 4-story malt building, a workhouse section, and an office area. LaFaso also put a 6-story corrugated steel addition in the back for elevators, a dog wash station, and sheltered drive-through drop-off. That height is meant to mimic the historic grain silos that were demolished after they burned in the 1970s. In fact, the loss of those silos decades ago nearly derailed LaFaso's project because the State Historic Preservation Office initially ruled that the complex lacked historic integrity without them. But then he discovered the old equipment hidden in the building and buried under debris, allowing him to win unanimous approval upon appeal, although it delayed the project by 9 months. Today, the building hosts 86 apartments around the perimeter of the building, split about evenly between 1- and 2-bedroom units. Of that, 32 are single-level flats, while the rest are loft units. 7 are spread over 3 levels, including 2 2-bedroom units and 5 1-bedroom units, while the rest are 2-story units, and 11 units have private entrances on the first floor directly from the outside, with the living and sleeping space upstairs. One of the units even contains one of the 2 remaining turning machines. And there's a single apartment on the 7th floor next to the upper space where the electric motor, giant gears, and belts still hang from above. This was one of the first buildings to use electricity from Niagara Falls in the city of Buffalo, LaFaso said. The building was built as a machine, and there's a patent on the building itself. The units vary in size from 420 to 1,300 square feet, with rents of $1,300 to $2,800 per month. Of the 86 units, 32 are now leased and occupied. In the center of the building, on 3 floors, are 412 self-storage units of varying sizes that will be managed by California-based Just Storage, which is led by former Life Storage executive. There's also 5,000 square feet of retail space on the first floor, and LaFaso hopes to at least one will become a coffee shop. Finally, there are 2 wood balconies overlooking the central storage area, a rec room with ping pong and foosball, and a remote work area. And the building will include a green roof patio. I'm so happy with the product, he said. I didn't want to go through all of this and not be happy with it. Empire AI Ready for Big Strides on UB's North Campus by Matt Glynn. The University of Buffalo plans to break ground this fall on Empire IA Supercomputing Center on its North Campus in Amherst. Once it's up and running, the facility will become a focal point of the state's Empire AI initiative. Empire AI is a research consortium of higher education and private research institutions from around the state. UB is the home of its hub, and others are noticing, as Venu Ganivaraju discovered on a recent recruiting trip to India on behalf of the university. I'm telling you, Empire AI is the biggest draw because that's how they take the news, said Govindaru, UB Senior Vice President for Research, Innovation, and Economic Development. AI is happening. Empire AI is in New York and Buffalo is the home. Competition among U.S. universities for international students has become more intense amid the current political climate and the U.S. issuing fewer student visas. As UB tries to attract more international students, UB's connection to Empire AI helps the university stand out, Govinda Rujo said. Similarly, faculty members are being drawn to UB's new Department of AI and Society, he said. I think it is making a big difference, he said. Empire AI's Alpha system launched in 2024 at UB's downtown campus. UB is preparing to install equipment for Empire AI's beta system, which will have computing power 11 times more powerful than Alpha's. The way to look at it is if you're a scientist and your job is going to take 2 days before, now it's going to take a couple of hours, Govinda Raju said. Your job was going to take a month, now it's like a few days. So it just completely accelerates the whole process and keeps the momentum going on research projects, he said. UB says researchers are using the turbocharged computing power to develop technology for projects including those designed to ease the nation's shortage of mental health professionals, improve medical imaging, and help people with motor neuron diseases such as ALS. Since Empire AI is a consortium, UB shares access to the systems with other partners who are carrying out projects of their own. Empire AI has grown into a $5 million initiative, a combination of public and private funding. What the governor has allowed us to do with Empire AI is unleashing those whole possibilities for curiosity-driven research for the public good, Govindaraju said. This is not very easy to emulate, by the way, because you need the political will, and you need the funding, and you need the critical mass of universities, and so on. We are so fortunate. Next comes the Gamma system, the permanent center planned for the North Campus. The Empire AI equipment from the downtown facility will be moved there. The new supercomputing center is expected to be operational in 2028, said Kiran Kevshah, Director of Research Computing at Empire AI. We are, right now, at the latest and greatest when we release beta, Keshav said. So we are leaving it open to see what's going to come with the Gamma Data Center build-out and what technologies we'll have to work with at that time as it relates to the computing and storage platform. Keshav said Empire AI is making available to researchers the types of resources that used to only be accessible by a few large tech companies because universities on their own couldn't afford them. Those limitations had the potential to leave academic researchers waiting in line or having to scale back their ideas in areas such as health, climate, or infrastructure, he said. As powerful as the beta system will be compared to alpha, the gamma system will represent another huge leap in supercomputing power, Govindaraju said. It's only left to our imagination that what the next wave of technology will be like, he said. And he sees potential for spin-off development from research by companies that want to have locations near the facility. I think it will be a cascading effect in an indirect way that you want to be close to where the action is, Govindaraju said. And again, the cascading effect is more faculty members are coming here for Empire AI, more students are coming here, talented ones. With this kind of training, how many students are graduating from other universities who have hands-on training with these kinds of machines, he said. Preservation Board eyes landmark status for 2 East Side sites by Jonathan D. Epstein. Tired of seeing developers and property owners asking to knock down some of Buffalo's oldest and most historic buildings, the Buffalo Preservation Board is proposing to designate 2 late 19th century commercial buildings on the east side as local landmarks in order to secure them for more protection. The panel, whose rulings are often only advisory to the Common Council, except in the case of local landmarks and historic districts, wants to landmark a pair of 3-story buildings at 654 William Street and 1121 Broadway, which date to 1889 and 1899 respectively. The board has authority under the city code and has standing subcommittee on landmarking that regularly evaluates properties. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the Viewpoints section of Buffalo News on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. The board scheduled public hearings on the proposal for April 2nd. If approved, the application would be recommended to the Common Council for an additional public hearing and formal approval. The William Street building was designed by architect Louis Sanger in the Romanesque Revival style and constructed in 1889 at the northwest corner of William and Sherman Streets. It was built for $15,000 for businessman John Eckard, who had opened a dry goods store at William and Emsley Streets in 1875, and whose son, John, would later develop the intersection of Broadway and Fillmore, including the department store that carried the family's name. The red brick building, whose original address was 554 William, prior to William Street being extended in 1929, was initially occupied by Susan Harris's clothing store and later by Globe Clothiers, A. Markson and Son, Levin Michaels Home Furnishings, Eugene S. Krantz Wines and Liquors, Grover C. Steinecker Home Furnishings, and the Aaron Goldberg Furniture House until 1990. More recently, it was the William Mini Mart, which is now vacant. According to the application, it was built at a time when William Street was widely recognized as one of the East Side's principal commercial corridors, behind only Main Street, with dense pedestrian activity and a concentration of department stores, theaters, hardware merchants, and specialty retailers. And it's been determined to be eligible for listing on the National Register of Historic Places, which qualifies it for tax credits for renovation work. Currently, the building is owned by Aslam Hossain's United Assets Corporation, Manhattan, based in Queens. The second building, the Paczorowski Building at 1121 Broadway, is located on the south side of Broadway, east of Sweet Avenue. Designed by architect William G. Ryman in his Renaissance Revival style, it was constructed as a home and a store for Polish patriot and immigrant John Paczorowski, who was imprisoned in Poland for 6 months for his involvement in the January 1863 uprising against Russian rule before emigrating to the United States in 1870. Part of a wave of Polish immigration, he settled in Buffalo by 1890 and was active in Buffalo's Polish community, the Assumption Roman Catholic Church, and Stanislaw Polish Roman Catholic Cemetery Association. He also opened a wholesale liquor and saloon business, initially next door at 1119 Broadway, and later run by his son Alexander, who lived at 1121 Broadway and served in the state assembly. The building later housed a neighborhood post office, 2 drugstores, a candy store, a soda fountain, and businesses such as Sellers Firestone Home and Auto Supplies, S&H Green Stamp Company, Prestige Furniture, and Damsel Corporation Appliances. Now owned by Miriella D. Cristofaro and Edwin A. Jablonski of Buffalo, it's been vacant since 2000. Carner plans cottages, tree houses. Less than a year after acquiring Twin Elms Estate in East Aurora, a local development firm plans to expand the existing health spa into a campground with seasonal cottages, modern tree houses, and a lodge that are all focused on wellness. Carner Development Group, owned by Rachel Krajewski and her mother Kathleen Miller, plans to maintain the Cardia Health Spa and Wellness Center at 1196 Big Tree Road, but renovate 2 buildings and construct several others to provide sleeping accommodations. It's applying to the town of Aurora for a special use permit and site plan approval for the project. Plans call for building 7 seasonal cottages and 2 treehouse rentals, while converting one building into administrative offices and sleeping quarters for 7, putting 2 more sleeping quarters in another building. Karner will also construct a 2,400 square foot lodge and wellness center, and it will triple the number of parking spaces from 20 to 61. Karner bought the 83.1 acre estate from Dr. Jennifer Jennings Cardia at Twin Elms LLC last May for $2 million. Previously, Karner had indicated plans to renovate the property into a boutique hotel with 8 to 10 rooms and an event venue for at least 150 people. Stay calm in a storm. When stock markets swing, it can pay for investors to be patient. By Stan Cho. With the war in Iran slowing the global flow of oil and causing extreme swings in stock markets, it's natural to want to do something to protect your retirement savings. Historically, though, staying calm is usually best. The U.S. stock market has a track record of recovering from every steep drop it took. Whether it's a financial global crisis, a trade war, or a military war, the S&P 500 so far always recouped its losses to push towards more records. Of course, that can take years, but anyone who moved their 401k investments out of stocks risked missing out on the recovery and further gains. Will that happen again? No one can say for sure, and some things are different this time around, but many professional investors and strategists are sticking with the advice they usually give. As long as it's money you don't need soon, which should never be in stocks in the first place, try and be patient and ride out the stock market swings, tough as it is. Huge swings, little change. The S&P 500 was only 4.4% below its all-time high, which was set in January as of March 12th's close. It feels worse because of how sharply stock prices have swung recently, often hour to hour as well as day to day. Several times since the start of the Iran war, the Dow Jones Industrial Average plunged about 900 points in the morning, only to erase its loss later in the day or come close to it. The U.S. stock market doesn't often behave exactly like this, but it has a regular history of falling to steep losses before rising again. The S&P 500 saw a decline of at least 10% every year or so. Such drops are common enough that professional investors have a name for them, a correction. Often, experts view them as a culling of optimism that could be otherwise run overboard and drive stock prices too high. Should you sell now? Selling your stocks or moving your 401k investments away from stocks and into bonds may offer less chance of seeing huge drops. However, getting out of the market would also mean having to figure out the right time to get back in, unless you're willing to give up any future recovery and gains. Timing the market correctly is always difficult. Some of the best days in the U.S. stock market's history were clustered in among downturns. Some recoveries take longer than others, but experts often recommend not putting money into stocks that you can't afford to lose for several, up to 10 years. Emergency funds for things like home repairs or medical bills should not be invested in stocks. If you're new to investing, apps on smartphones make trading easier and cheaper than ever. That's helped draw in new generation of investors who may not be used to such wild swings in the market. The good news is younger investors often have the gift of time. With decades to go until retirement, they can afford to ride the waves and let their stock portfolios hopefully recover before compounding and eventually growing even bigger. For them, drops in prices may almost be like stocks going on sale. If you're near retirement, older investors have less time than younger ones for their investments to bounce back. People who have already retired may want to cut back on spending and withdrawals after sharp market downturns, because bigger withdrawals will remove more potentially compounding ability in the future. Even in retirement, some people will need their investments to last 30 years or more. Rating your 401k. If you have no other choice, you have no other choice. But selling stocks in your 401k account and withdrawing cash packs a double whammy. One, you may have to pay tax, as well as a possible 10% early withdrawal penalty. Two, a withdrawal means no chance of those investments recovering their losses and growing over time. A 401k loan is possible in some cases, but with those come their own peculiarities and possible penalties. If you have a pension, you don't have to pay as much attention to any of this. Defined benefit pensions, which few U.S. workers still have, means you're in line to get a defined payment regardless of what the stock market does. Some differences this time. When stocks are falling, prices for treasury bonds and gold often rise as investors move into investments considered safer. That's why many advisors suggest keeping a diversified portfolio to help smooth out shocks. This time around, though, treasury prices were hurt by worries about high oil prices and inflation. Gold's price also struggled occasionally when yields on treasury bonds climbed. That's because gold, which pays its investors nothing, looks less attractive when treasuries pay more in interest. How long will this last? No one knows, and don't let anybody tell you otherwise. Dick's House of Sport is going over big with shoppers at its new location in Amherst, and it's no surprise to anyone who has been watching retail. The experiential store concept is sought after in the industry, one of the buzziest brick-and-mortar brands there is these days, and is a big draw among consumers. At 120,000 square feet over 2 floors, Dick's doubles the size of its regular store, probably more than twice the fun. The giant store incorporates technologies such as digital golf bays and old-fashioned strategies such as a real outdoor turf field that keep people, groups, and families coming back for more. The biggest wow feature is the store's 30-foot climbing wall at the front. It can be rented at $15 for 15 minutes. 3 digital golf bays allow customers to test new equipment, finding the right fit, and perfect their swing, starting at $1 a minute. There is also a Hit Tracks cage for practice and fittings in every sport from hockey, baseball, and lacrosse to softball, field hockey, and soccer. Time in the cage costs $15 for 15 minutes. All of the interactive features allow customers to test out different gear sold at the store. You've been listening to a reading of articles and features from the Sunday, March 22nd, 2026 issue of the Viewpoints section of Buffalo News. We read from the Viewpoints section of the Buffalo News every Sunday at 6 p.m. Your reader has been Jean. Thank you for listening.
Coming up next in the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service, we have the National Enquirer. At 8 p.m., we have People Magazine. And at 9 o'clock, we have the New York Times Book Review. Stay tuned for these readings and more. And if you have any comments, suggestions, or questions, please stay with us. If you're listening to this publication online, you're probably using our website, a podcast player like Spotify or iTunes, a streaming service like Siro, or a smart speaker. Did you know that we now have a dedicated app that can be downloaded to any mobile device, like a smartphone or tablet, for free? App users can conveniently access our live stream and any episode of our podcast easier than ever. To download the app, just type NFRRS in the search window in the Apple App Store or in the Google Play Store. Contact us anytime if you have any questions by calling 716-821-5555, extension 5. Thank you. following program is intended for listeners who are blind, have low vision, or have another print disability, which